Who is the greatest wrestler, in-ring performer of this generation? And I will give the answer, same answer that I gave on the live post-show, the Raw after WrestleMania, and that's Seth Rollins. And I will say that with 100% confidence. Now, I bring this topic up not to as much engage a debate between Andy and I, or for me to drag AEW guys into the ground.
Yeah.
That is not what this is about. This is, let's talk about it. Who is the greatest in-ring performer of this generation? If you have to pick one, now we're going to talk about names. Yeah. I've got bullet points on a bunch of other names. I do too. But I'm picking Seth Rollins.
So when you texted me that we were doing this, one name popped up first.
That's the answer I'm looking for.
And it's the answer that kind of every time this topic and this conversation has come up, it's the same name that comes to my mind every single time. And who I think is the greatest in-ring wrestler of this generation is Bryan Danielson. I think Bryan Danielson he's the greatest in-ring wrestler of all time. I'll even go that far. I think what he is able to do post career-ending neck surgery is wild. It's crazy that he is able to compete at this level. And you got to remember, even before the neck injury in WWE and stuff, no, he wasn't able to do the stuff he's doing in AEW. Obviously, doesn't take away from the stuff that he did in WWE during that time.
Right.
His matches with Punk were fantastic. His WrestleMania 30, he literally changed a WrestleMania booking.
Yep.
He forced that.
Yep.
By being adored by everybody else.
Yep.
He has done so much in this business that nobody else has been able to live up to. I think it's very clear that and there's a lot of guys that we're going to talk about. There's a lot of guys up for this discussion, but to me, the clear number one is Bryan Danielson.
If Bryan Danielson is the clear number one, you got to hand it to the guy that trained him, man. You got to hand it to Shawn Michaels, the Heartbreak Kid who trained Bryan Danielson.
Yeah, and you see a lot of, when I see Bryan Danielson wrestle, I see a little bit of Shawn.
Yeah.
I see a lot of Bret Hart.
Yes. Oh, I see more Bret than Shawn.
I do too.
For sure.
And when you talk about greatest of all time in ring, those two guys are
right up there.
Yep. And so Bryan Danielson is the fusion of those two guys kind of together. And I think it works amazingly for him.
Here's when I was thinking about Bryan, because obviously Seth, Bryan, Kenny Omega, you can even throw Will Ospreay into the conversation. Yep. I think with Will Ospreay, I think he's the next generation's best wrestler ever.
Yeah, that's the thing is what are we defining as generation?
Right. And then, so that was going to be my point about Bryan.
Yeah.
And about AJ. I feel like Bryan, and this, correct me if my lack of independent Ring of Honor knowledge clouds this conversation.
Okay.
I feel like Bryan and AJ, I'm not saying they're the past generation, but I feel like they paved the way for Seth to be this generation's best in-ring performer. So I guess my point in saying this is, I guess my generation, if we're terming it, is sort of when the indie guys sort of made their way onto mainstream.
So when NXT kind of took off,
I would say 20.
See, because 2012,
I was gonna say 2010, but Bryan
was in NXT
was in the game show,
and I think AJ fits that description of past generation,
because AJ's done some incredible things post TNA. His New Japan stuff and his WWE stuff is incredible.
Yeah.
And the reason I sort of lump Bryan in with that is because Bryan was known for all of his Ring of Honor and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Now, when he got to WWE, it was sort of he transitioned.
Yeah.
It worked.
Yeah.
It was great. And then, everything has happened the way that it's happened. I don't know. That's just kind of...
I think if we're to do this properly, we kind of have to define what the generation is.
Okay.
I mean, we could talk about like from a specific age and under. We could talk about. I mean, there's a lot of things because you got to talk about people in their prime. You got to talk about when they're taking off, that kind of thing. Because I think we are. Because Will Ospreay's in this generation too, but I also get what you're saying about being the next because he's kind of hitting his prime.
Yeah, he's not even, to me, he's barely there.
Yeah, well, and I think there's nobody else that's a clear front winner for next generation's greatest in-ring wrestler than Will Ospreay.
Absolutely.
I think by the time he hangs it up, we might be saying he's the greatest like in-ring wrestler of all time.
I won't say it.
You'll never say it. Unless it goes to WWE, then you'll say it.
I won't. I'll never say it. Nope. I'll never say it.
But I think there's a really good chance that we could be saying that about him. I wouldn't deny anybody saying that now about him, honestly. But
that's fair.
But I mean, like if we're talking about like certain generations, if we're taking like 2012 on,
let's define it from 2012 on. Let's just say 2012, the beginning of NXT, until now, is a generation. Because I feel like if you look back before that, that was sort of the John Cena era.
Yeah.
Things really started shifting when NXT showed up.
Yeah.
You know, with the Bray Wyatts and even with
Kevin Owens,
Sami
Zayn,
Zayn,
Balor, Shinsuke,
all that kind of stuff. So I feel like we sort of shifted the landscape when that happened.
Yeah.
And, you know, WWE AJ falls into that as well. So
yeah.
I would say 2012 to now. So the last 12 years.
I still think Bryan's up there. The last 12 years, I'll put Bryan probably at my 1. But if we're taking him kind of out a little bit,
I mean, I think that's up to you. I mean, I think if we're saying 2012, everything that he's really known for globally and
has happened from 2012 on.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think Bryan's my number 1.
Yep.
But if I had like listing some others who are right up there with him, I mean, Kenny Omega has to be on this list.
I was going to say, we haven't talked about Kenny Omega.
Has to be on this list.
Yeah.
And the guy that was with Kenny for a lot of his matches, Okada has to be on this list. I personally putting Ospreay on this list a little, like he can be down a little bit, but I think Ospreay's on this list. Seth's on this list for sure. I think the guy that's right now on our iPad wrestling is on this list, and Gunther. I think
Roman Reigns on this list?
In ring, I don't think so.
Okay.
I think overall,
yep,
he's on this list.
Yep,
in ring, I don't think so.
Yep.
I think for Roman, because the thing about that one of my guidelines for in ring is it doesn't matter who they're in the ring with.
Yes.
They're going to have a great match.
Yes.
I think for Roman, it depends on who he's in the ring with.
Got to have a good dance partner.
I think with Cena, it depends on who he's in the ring with.
Cena for sure, yeah.
I think AJ, for the most part. I think obviously the Shinsuke stuff and everything else, but I think I take that more as circumstances than I think I'd take it away from him. I think Bryan Danielson, you could put him in there with anybody. He's going to kill it. Kenny Omega, same way. Okada, the same way. Seth, the same way. Gunther, the same way. I don't think I've seen a bad Gunther WWE match.
Where's Cody Rhodes fit in all this?
That's the question. I've been thinking about him. And
because Cody Rhodes would tell you he's the best in-ring performer ever. I love his confidence.
I do too. I love his confidence. I don't agree with him, but I love his confidence. I mean, he's up there.
Yeah.
He's for sure up there. Because the stuff he did on the independent scene when he left WWE was great. Mm-hmm. His stuff in AEW was great, apart from the Anthony Ogogo stuff. Coming back to WWE, everything he's done has been incredible. Even with a torn pec, he had one of the greatest Hell in a Cell matches of all time.
Yes, he did.
Which is wild. So, I think he's on this list. I just don't know how high up he is on this list.
Right. Yeah, I don't know that. I think personally I could put him higher than Kenny Omega, but I know that a lot of people would laugh at me.
Yeah.
I'm just saying.
I wouldn't laugh at you, but I would have a tough time doing that.
Well, there was a YouTube comment on one of our shows a couple of weeks back, and I don't remember who it was, so forgive me, who said that the guy on the left is a WWE mark. So I was talking about me. Yes.
Yes.
I am.
He admits it. At least he admits it.
Exactly. I do it. But I will give credit where credit is due. Kenny Omega is high on this list.
Yeah.
I would say your list is probably Bryan's 1.
Yes. We could do a Mount Rushmore.
Okay.
Right now, generation. Of my top 4 would be Bryan 1, Kenny 2. Ooh, I put myself on the spot now. I don't really know.
Sure did.
Bryan 1, Kenny 2. Oh, man, there's so many. Probably. This is my preliminary one, and I'll give a
revised
concrete one at the very end.
Okay.
But right now, it's looking like Bryan 1, Kenny 2, AJ probably 3.
Yep.
And Okada 4.
So no Seth.
Was Seth right on the outside?
Okay. So mine would be.
This is hard.
And then I would go Seth 1, Bryan 2, AJ 3, Kenny Omega 4. That would be my 4.
Yeah.
And I would put Cody Rhodes fringe 5.
See, I feel like we're missing people, though. I feel
I'm
we're missing
are.
somebody. I'm like running through my index of like wrestlers in my head.
Listen, send us comments.
Yeah.
Send us, all of your thoughts at SQCircle_radio on social media. Comment on this YouTube video. We will respond to it. We'll address it next week because, again, I'm sure we're forgetting guys, and that's fine. This is an off the top of the head discussion here.
Yeah.
I'm going to say Seth Rollins is the best for everything that you said about Bryan Danielson.
Yeah.
I feel like that Seth is the better combination of Shawn and Brett with a little bit of Macho Man thrown in there. But he's a better promo than both Shawn and Brett. Maybe not Macho.
Macho's great. Macho's great.
But I feel like Seth he has this perfect combination of all these great wrestlers and influences. Plus, he takes from that independent stuff. Like he's influenced by the WWE stuff.
Yeah.
But he also understands
where he came from. Yeah.
Where he came from, how to be different than those guys.
Yeah.
How to make himself stand out. And I don't mean just character, just how to make himself stand out. Because we're just talking about in ring. And again, you can put anybody in there with him, and he can do incredible things. I mean, Roman started the Logan Paul train of really good matches. I don't count Miz. Roman started it, but then when Seth had the match with him at WrestleMania, I remember thinking like, why are we wasting Seth Rollins on this WrestleMania? And then my goodness, tore the house down. So I just think Seth has it all.
Yeah.
And I just don't know that I can be convinced otherwise.
Yeah. I mean, I can definitely see that about Seth. And I think, honestly, like WrestleMania 40 made a lot of that case as well.
Absolutely.
I think that did that very, very well.
Yep.
I'll say that my whole reasoning behind Bryan Danielson, not even just like AEW Bryan Danielson, but just Bryan Danielson in general, is he can go out there and not only like have great matches with your MJFs, your John Moxleys, your Kenny Omegas, your Okadas, your Will Ospreays. He can go out there with a guy like Penta, a guy like Rey Fenix, a guy like, insert name here. And you're still thinking, I can't miss that match. I can't not watch that because it's Bryan Danielson.
I'm not going to say that Seth is better than Bryan because of this one thing, but I would like to see Bryan in this spot. And that is the Seth versus Omos match. Think back to that match that we were like, what are we doing here?
Yeah. I'll say this.
I guess I just mean in context of putting this best wrestler of this generation in the ring with a big guy.
Brock Lesnar.
Yes, Bryan and Brock.
And that was during the era of Brock doesn't lose. Ever. But
Brock is so good when Brock wants to be. and when Brock has that dance partner. I just mean from the Omos standpoint of Omos is just not very good. He doesn't have a whole lot of skill. So you put we're talking about getting in there with anybody.
Yeah.
Put him in there with a really big guy who is really less than.
Yeah.
By a long shot. And let's see what happens.
I mean, you could make the argument of Kane on Kane's back half of his career.
Okay, yeah.
And I mean, that tag team was the hottest tag team in WWE during that time.
Yep.
I think you can't discredit the Brock match. Because
no. I just think Brock is far more skilled than the scenario that I'm trying to present.
But even during that time period, though, like, he never lost.
That's true.
And you went into those matches knowing Brock's not going to lose. Mm-hmm. There's only two people that made me believe Brock might lose. That was Bryan Danielson and that was AJ Styles.
Yep.
And both of them, I was like, oh, could you imagine if Bryan beats Brock right here? Like, that's the type of emotion that Bryan brings out of people.
I agree.
He went into Wembley and wrestled. Who did he wrestle at Wembley? Wasn't Will. Wasn't Okada. Who did he wrestle at Wembley? Because he's had like 5 fantastic matches in a row. Kenny? He didn't wrestle Kenny at Wembley.
No.
That's going to bug me.
Look it up.
Anyways, he wrestled somebody really good at Wembley. And then literally the next week wrestled Ricky Starks at All Out and had a fantastic match. Not taking anything away from Ricky Starks.
Sure.
Because Ricky Starks is really good.
Sure.
But just to turn around and just to have consistent match after match after match. And not saying Seth doesn't have that. Seth does have consistent match after match. Yep. There are just a couple of matches from Seth that leave bad taste. Mm. And honestly, and it's not his fault, the Fiend match at Hell in a Cell leaves a really bad taste.
See,
the match where the Fiend won the title off of him kind of leaves a bad taste.
See,
but that's not Seth's fault.
Right.
But you can't help but associate those two things together, and it dampens it a little bit.
And I feel like the Fiend Bryan stuff, like, sort of fits in the same category.
I don't know. I think Bryan was the only one to feud with the Fiend and come out as strong as he did going into it.
It was definitely interesting. I don't know. That's not a knock on Bray Wyatt. We're not talking ill about the Fiend and whatever. I don't know.
The Fiend was one of those characters that
extremely hard to
book for an old man who did not know how to book his own self out of bed half the time.
Right.
And booked them into corners that they could not get out of.
Right.
And it hurt everybody involved.
Yeah, it really did. All right. I think it's going to be a long debate that will never be done while you're looking at Bryan's match.
Yeah, so it's going to bug me until I figure this out.
Again, shoot us some comments on social media at SQCircle_radio. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see that Andy and myself, our social media handles directly are on there. So make sure that you hit us up. Let us know who we forgot. Let us know who you think is the best in-ring performer of this generation. And as always, you can leave us a comment on our YouTube channel. If you're watching on our YouTube channel and you're not subscribed, it doesn't cost you a thing. Please make sure you do it. We would appreciate it very much.